Stanley. Look at the museum there. There's some crazy stuff in that. But some of the most interesting is look how much wool they shipped out of that place. It's phenomenal.
Back to White Tanner Ranch, it was about 1,000 cow ranch. I had 2 employees when I went there. Cow-calf operation, wean the calves, sell them. Seemed like it was going to be a little slower pace. It was for a little while. The owner got bored. So through the course of 5 years, we developed a 48-bed guest ranch on that ranch. Became known as the Marlboro Ranch. We ended up courting Philip Morris's major clients, and this guest ranch looked like a 1770s frontier town. Pretty cool. When I left there, I was there 10 years. When I left there, I had 45 employees, and I was kind of ready to get back to agriculture because I was waking up in the morning going, I'm going to do this till I retire. And because it's all about people management, customers, and corporate, and lawyers, and so I had the opportunity then to go to work for Ted Turner, and I worked for him for the last half of my career, 24 years. I actually came back to Bozeman, Flying D Ranch. Many of you know where it is. It's just south of town here. I managed it for 7 years, and that was in the early days of having bison on it. As I was telling Boak when I interviewed for the job, I wasn't wild about working with bison, but when I got over there and realized what they were trying to do, I could see they were having trouble with it. It was not working. And that's because bison are similar to cattle, but they're not cattle. And so I'm a little bit of a sucker for a challenge. So anyway, I managed the Flying D Ranch, and we worked with bison a lot and figured out how to manage bison, what worked well for them. And I could talk for an hour or more about that because it's pretty instructive. Bison taught me a lot. I like cattle. I like bison. I like managing any of them, but I was there 7 years, and we did feedlot trials. One of the main problems we had in our bison business was that we would raise these bison, get them to yearlings or 2-year-olds, probably cheaper than you could a beef animal. We sent them off to commercial feed yards to go on feed, then to slaughter. They did terrible in the feed yard. Why? Multiple reasons for that, and that's a whole nother seminar I could talk about. But we ended up building a feedlot on the ranch. We did feed trials where we were essentially trying different things to figure out a feeding system to put bison on concentrate feed to get them to finish, and we were actually largely successful with that. So 7 years on the Flying D, and then I went to Vermejo Park Ranch in New Mexico. It was our largest ranch. It was 675,000 acres, all in a block, an old Spanish land grant, largely a wildlife ranch, had about 10 or 11,000 elk on the ranch, a small bison herd, but it was also a guest ranch concession. We could and would host about 1,800 fishermen through the summer. We would host 200 to 300 hunters. We were the Walmart of elk hunting because of the elk herd size and everything. A lot of people involved, 1,000 coal bed methane gas wells on the ranch. We had a 400,000 acre timber resource that we were actually doing timber work in. And so I got really rounded out there in many different areas that were kind of new to me. And then at the end of 7 years, the position here, we had a home office in Bozeman always that oversaw management of the ranches. The general manager retired. I applied for the position. They must have had a short list. I lucked out and they hired me. So in 2014, I moved back to Bozeman, and now I oversaw management of all of our properties, and this is where they're at. At that time, there were 16 ranches. There was 4 in Montana, 2 in South Dakota, 5 or 6 here in the Sandhills of Nebraska. There was 1 in Oklahoma and 3 in New Mexico. And so jump from single ranch management, although large and complex, to multi-ranch management with a staff. And so I'm just trying to set the context for my background experience. it encompassed about 1.9 million acres. We had about 160 employees. A large portion of those were in our guest services operation. Those are employee intensive. We ended up with a bison herd that would fluctuate, but about 45,000 bison. And we were essentially selling commercial breeding bulls. We had grain-fed and grass-fed bison sales. We were in both markets, and that's a whole nother story about how that happened. We'll come back to that. And so timber, oil, and gas operations on these, farming, commercial hunting, fishing. We started ecotourism venue at Vermejo Park. We had a renewable energy site in New Mexico, 30 megawatt, run about 6,000 houses. So experience and all of that. Incorporated on all these ranches, there were threatened and endangered or imperiled species projects on these ranches at the same time. It isn't like I was directly involved, but the ranch staff has to facilitate and help those projects out. And so, again, another area of expertise, a learning experience, if you will. And through the course of the year, we had numerous research projects on our properties. We're about 18, and if we have time at the end here, I'll show you a list of some of the current ones that are going. Some you researchers might be interested in that. So that kind of rounds out my experience. And I retired at the end of last year. I now do a little bit of consulting. I play with my grandkids, travel a little bit. I had a dream career as a large ranch manager. Thanks to Mr. Turner and his trust, I got to oversee management of an unbelievable spectrum of properties and gain a lot of experience, and I'll be forever grateful to him for that. But it really gets back to now, begs the question, what are we managing? And when I say large ranches, let's just put that into context. The Flying V is 113,000 acres. Vermejo Park was 675,000 acres, 665. Our average ranch in the Sandhills, Nebraska is 70,000 acres. And so that's the context when I'm talking about large. And when we're managing large ranches, there's things involved that we oftentimes don't think about. There's obviously, most of these in the West are going to have some livestock on them, and they almost all have a wildlife component of some sort. So we know those animals are running around on top of the ground, and we're trying to monetize certainly the livestock, and in some cases the wildlife as well, with maybe a hunting program. And the real estate value, why would someone like Mr. Turner buy ranches? Well, one, he likes them. Two, it's cool. Three, there's great places to go recreate on them. But from a business standpoint, land appreciates. I think our ranch is appreciated about 4%. So if you think about someone with wealth that can put money into land and get a steady appreciation on it, it's not a bad investment. Some of them appreciate it at a higher level than that. There's renewable energy, wind and solar. We never got into wind. We did do some solar. Rangelands are there. Crops and timber are what we're going to essentially grow. You think about it, there's minerals, coal bed methane, oil, gas, other things that you might mine, geothermal there. And so from a 30,000 foot view, if we look at these large ranch landscapes, most of them incorporate almost all of this. And so when I came out of college and started to work on a ranch, what did I want to do? I wanted this. Is that all there is to it? Well, if you're a cow boss, kind of, you're going to have quite a bit of this, or it's going to be this, and that's going to aggravate you probably, because elk in the West are usually a pain in the neck to a serious cattle guy. But that's the extent of it. But when you move into management, you've got this, you're covering all of this. And if you overemphasize one part of it or focus just on one part of it, what happens to the rest of it? I'll ask some questions. Let's say in recreation, we had a recreational attribute on a very large ranch in New Mexico. So we were hosting 2,600 guests per year for various things. Well, what if we change that? What if we put 12,000 guests through that ranch in a year? Any impact? What does it affect?
Should it affect the wildlife population and the rangeland health?
Exactly. Or real life scenario, oil and gas. That bought that ranch, it did not have one gas well on it. The gas was owned by a third party. In other words, you can't keep them from not coming and get the gas. So over the period of 10 years, 1,000 gas wells. Any impact? What does it affect? Road infrastructure, there's electric line, water line, and a gas line to every one of those wells. So it starts affecting lots of things here on this chart. Real estate, aesthetics, value, recreation. A lot of recreationists that are coming there, they're not enthused about saying gas wells. The point I'm trying to make here is, as a large ranch manager, all this stuff's connected. If you overemphasize or exasperate one part of it, it affects other part of it. If we have 10,000 elk on the ranch, and there should be 5,000 elk on the ranch, what does it affect? Well, in our commercial operation, we can sell a lot of elk hunts. We're the Walmart of elk hunting. What happens to our rangelands? Overgrazed, beat up, riparian areas in terrible shape. Cause and effect. So what do we do about that? We over 10 years, it took us 10 years to get the elk numbers back down to 65 or 7,000 elk to balance this out, because we're aware of how one thing's affecting another. At the same time, we lower revenue from wildlife sales. So everything's interconnected. And yet that's not everything that's on this chart. A lot of what's going on here affects this. And this is the gold of the West is water and water retention. So what's going on in that property makes a difference with how much water. It isn't how much water you get, it's how much water do you keep. How much water do you get in the soil profile? How much water do you hold? Are your riparian systems in good shape? Do they have beaver in them? When I got to this ranch in New Mexico, there was hardly any beaver, and the riparian areas were in terrible shape. Now we've got forage growing in the riparian areas, and we have beaver back in the system, catching and holding water. In our overgrazed lands in Nebraska, when we ease up and start grazing them differently, all of a sudden we are increasing water holding capacity, because the rain just doesn't hit the ground and run off. And so anything else needs to be on this chart? For a long time, this was the chart. I didn't add anything else to it. But as I progressed in my career, there's a couple components still missing. Anybody have any thoughts? The biological community living in the soils actually drives most of what's going on top of the ground. I got to almost to the end of my career before I really made that connection. You'll hear a lot of talk now about regenerative grazing, regenerative farming. What does that mean? We'll talk about it just a little bit. Again, that's a whole nother seminar that we could get into. But what's going on in the soils is a big deal, because the soil biology essentially can affect water holding capacity. If the healthier your soils are on a biological basis, they can create aggregation, which creates pore space, which creates the ability to take water in and hold it. And that's huge. And then, of course, on top of all this, what about the humans? It's all connected, right? It's the humans living on the ranch, your crew, your staff, but also the humans in the community. How are you interacting with them? What you're producing on that ranch interacting and helping your community? Or more importantly, are you being an interactive part of the community? Are you helping people in your community? So the 30,000 foot view, this is what it is. It's all interconnected. And oftentimes the problem we have, because us in agriculture, we're kind of head down and hind end up and we're going after it. And that's fine. You have to do that. It's a grind a little bit to get all the work done that needs done, but the management needs to come up and take a breath of air and get that 30,000 foot view. So I wanted to talk about this just a minute, because as I progressed through my my career, I really realized the last 4 or 5 years I was missing a connection. So this is the carbon cycle. You guys, I'm sure, have seen it before. We all know it's there. I just didn't realize at the level that I was interacting with it, whether I knew it or not, this whole time. So on this chart, what's missing? Organisms living in the soil. So there are more living organisms in the soil than there is above the ground. And I looked some of this up. I've learned about it the last 4 or 5 years. 15,000 different species of biota per gram of soil. Very active, very healthy, active, biologically alive soil. And these things are interacting with one another. Some of them are connected with plants. Some of them are connected with animals. Unhealthy biological soil has less and less active biology working in it. Soil biology drives the 4 ecosystem processes that we all know about: the solar, the water, the mineral cycle, the biological cycle or plant cycle. Abundant healthy soil drives abundant plant diversity, which drives abundant flora and fauna. Healthy active soil collects carbon in the form of organic matter and becomes a carbon sink. That's really important to a lot of people. It's on the cusp of being monetized at different levels. That's again another whole discussion, a whole other seminar. Unhealthy soil loses carbon, becoming a carbon bleed. Unhealthy soil, you can develop it by consistent season-long grazing, over tillage, over farming, keeping the soil bare. There's a whole lot to this. But these are things that I've realized. How we manage the soil with our grazing farming system moves the biological health of our soil for better or for worse. It's never static. It's either getting a little better or a little worse. And it drives, oftentimes, everything we can monetize on top of the soil. So if we look at this picture here, just ask a few questions. This is a herd of 2-year-old male bison. Everybody knows bison are hard to contain. You can't use them to mob graze, right? Well, our employee in Nebraska figured that out. That's what they're doing right there. They are mob grazing. So it's a high density impact, essentially, that's interacting with the soil biology. This is polyculture farming. This is farming where we are getting different varieties right up against one another. Why would we do that? And why is it healthy? And why is it have some aspects that maybe are more positive than monoculture farming? Again, it has to do with, one, soil cover. That soil is extremely well covered, but the different plants promote a different soil biology, and the different biologies that are connected with each different plant actually interact with one another. I'm using general terms, but that's the way it is. Season-long grazing, you will turn your pastures into more of a monoculture, and they will bleed carbon rather than sequester carbon. These are big generalities, but these are things that I have learned and have incorporated into our operations. So I'll jump back out of that and be glad to go back and talk about any questions you have on that. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about key components for large ranch managers. You guys are engaged in the first key component. You have to have a fundamental education, understanding of agriculture in general, biology, business, and create a basis for learning. Learn how to study, learn how to learn. You guys are here doing that now. It's crucial, mainly because when you graduate and you start on that career path, you're not done learning. You're actually just getting started. So what about employees? We talked about these large landscape ranches. I was a reasonable, handy guy when I was young. I could shoe horses, I could irrigate, I could bale hay, I could farm, I could work cattle, but how do you get that done on a 70,000 acre ranch? It's only me. So you've got to work through other people. So hiring, education, training, retaining, human resource management is actually crucial. And you can't know all this stuff coming out of college, but it's in front of you. You're going to need to learn it at some level, depending on where you go and how intense or how many people are involved in the operation. Jim Collins wrote a book, Good to Great. I don't know if anybody here have read that. It came out quite a while ago, but it was really his study of what really makes a really good company. And what makes a really good company is really good employees. And he likened it to being the company, if you will, or the business is the bus, and it's getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. That's a lot of what he talked about, the hedgehog concept. The business being refined to what do we do really well? We do it better than anybody else, focusing on that, not trying to get too distracted. But hiring employees is crucial. I think Chris Redmond came and visited with you guys. He worked with us in our organization, very talented individual, helped us with our recruiting and training of employees and really helped us get to the next level in that regard. So that's an area that you're going to need to know more about. Leadership, building a team and training a team. If you're leading people, you're in leadership. On a scale of horrible leader to the best leader that we've ever had, which in my opinion is Jesus, all of us are on that spectrum somewhere. That's the good news. The better news is no matter where you're at on that spectrum, you can learn to be a better leader. And so that leadership training, we ended up incorporating it into our ranches. All of our ranch managers and then assistant managers and foremen, we almost all gave all of them an opportunity to go to leadership training. And it's really, how do you lead? How do you set people up, one, to be successful? We ended up using a company called Echelon Front. They have a military bend to them, and they really teach leadership principles that they use in special forces. They oftentimes will even use military examples of the principles that they teach. Not everybody can get copacetic with that. It didn't bother me. 3/4 of our employees ate it up because the principles are sound. How do you set someone up to be successful? A good leader gives good employees an area of responsibility, an area of expectation, and gives them the latitude to make adjustments and move ahead and help them be successful in that. Also, a good leader keeps everybody accountable fairly. And it's not as easy as it might be. Economics and business. The ranching business is a confusing business because oftentimes we have what's called stacked enterprises. We have a cow-calf operation, but we're putting up hay, but we're planting some grain as well, and we're keeping calves over and running yearlings, or we have a feedlot. All those are different enterprise centers, if you will. And how do you manage the numbers so that you know where you're making it and where you're breaking it? Because most operations are. You have to have a system, if you will, to sort those financial enterprises out. Many of you are going to learn some of those things here if you get into enough accounting and whatnot. I know the principles are taught. We ended up using a very simple system. And it really is called a land-based enterprise system. Why do we own ranches? What's the number one reason? We want to own land. The number one question you should be able to answer is, if I do nothing else on that land other than lease or rent everything out, what's it cost me to own that ranch and keep it together? What are the taxes? What are the base costs? What are the infrastructure costs? And most ranchers cannot answer that question. And the reason is because they've got everything's run together, if you will, from these different enterprises. So in our operations, we separated the land enterprise. The cost of owning and maintaining the land was in its own budget. The bison enterprise was in its own budget. The farming enterprise was in its own budget. And by the way, the bison enterprise is paying the land enterprise fair market value for the grass today. The farming enterprise is paying the land enterprise fair market value for the farm ground it farms. It puts everything on an even playing field. If you own the land, do you have to have your own cows? Do you have to have your own farming? Or can you rent that out? If it has a rentable value, can your own enterprise pay you that value and still make money? That's how we kind of came back to how to sort this out. We ended up setting up our accounting really on this enterprise basis in the company. There's other ways to do it. And the folks that use accrual accounting, they just look at me and roll their eyes. That's fine. Accrual is kind of the industry standard, but what I'm saying is you have to figure out a way to figure out whether or not you're making money or not, and how do you make decisions? If I'm not making money in my farming, what do I do to make it profitable? So there has to be a system. I see this a lot. I saw it in our operations. I'm doing some consulting now, and I'll see it then. Business structure is critical in ranching operation. And what I mean by that is, what is this business model set up to do? I'll give some examples. I'm working with a ranch in northern Alberta, 10,000 acre ranch. 3,500 acres is really swamp. It's a wet lake, meadow bottom that part of the year is so wet you can't graze it. It has recurring vegetation in it. The rest of the ranch is uplands. And so they've got in there and decided, well, we need to get that forage off that wetland. So they spent a lot of money putting together track equipment to try to harvest this wetland forage into silage. Does that make sense? Financially, it might. Ecologically, it doesn't. But the point is they looked at a resource and decided, I'm going to put a bunch of money into equipment and systems to try to harvest this. And another way to approach it would be, is I'm going to wait till it's winter and it's froze up, and I'm going to drop some protein in the middle of it, and I'll let my animals go in there and winter graze it and treat it that way. Again, a different business structure. We had a ranch in Oklahoma, Tallgrass Prairie. We were set up to wean yearling 2-year-old bison up here, females, and make it a heifer grow out ranch. They were shipped down as yearling, grown out to 2 or 2.5 years and sent to the feedlot. Anybody understand the implications of taking ruminants and shipping them from northern latitudes to southern latitudes? Anybody that works in the yearling industry kind of knows this. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Ruminant animals going north to south have a hard time. Animals going south to north do not. In yearling cattle, typically, don't take northern latitude animals and ship them south to grow them out. We were doing that with bison, and it worked absolutely terrible. And the reason is because relocation is hard on bison. All of a sudden, they're coming off these upper Midwest plains with the forage that they grow, and all of a sudden they're in the tallgrass prairie, and they're going like, I've never seen this before. What is that? I mean, do I have to eat it? Heat, humidity, bugs, and disease. and our gains were absolutely terrible. And essentially, our death losses were too high, our transportation costs were too high. Essentially, the wrong business model for that ranch. We had to change something because it was extremely unprofitable. So oftentimes, you really need to fit what fits the land, the ranch, the ecosystem, the environment, and by the way, the ownership, particularly when you're getting down to operating a property for outside ownership, an absentee owner. What are their goals and aspirations for that property? And by the way, I can assure you, whatever it was when they bought the property, it will be a little different in 2 years. And that's part of it. Know that's coming. And so the right business structure and what fits there. The most profitable ranches we operated on with our bison were the ranches that were naturally wanting to give you something that you didn't have to put any inputs into, and you could harvest it very economically. The Sand Hill ranches in Nebraska, all those ranches want to do is grow grass. All the bison want to do is grow grass, and we graze them year round. Our costs are very minimal. And again, it's a good example of it's a kind of a win-win, and so a good business model. Soil management, grazing system, and cropping systems. Again, getting back to that 30,000-foot view, how do you design these to accelerate or improve soil health on your ranch? Because your soil health is going to drive the health of everything above the ground. Communication skills. Anybody here, you guys, you professors, go look the other way. You have a class that you go to and you just grit your teeth. You don't like it. You don't want to go there. You don't see how it fits. You'd rather do almost anything else to go to that class. I have one. Technical report writing. I'm a cow guy. I'm going to manage cattle. I'm going to manage ranches. Why am I having to take this technical report writing class? And 5 years into my career, guess what I'm doing? I'm writing reports to ownership and or management, and later on to boards, and later on to ownership family members, explaining to them what's going on. Was that a skill I needed? Absolutely. Did I realize it at the time? No, not a chance. But the communication skills, first and foremost, on ranch and off ranch. On ranch is to your crew, getting back to that leadership component. The leadership component is half communication, setting people up. Do they know what's expected of them? Do they know what the plan is? Do they have buy-in on the plan? Did you communicate in a way to help them build the plan? Off ranch, what's going on in the community? Might be regional, might be state. How am I interacting with other people in my community and communicating with them? Then, as I talked to you about ownership, communicating effectively with ownership and even a board of directors at some level is going to be crucial. And so communication is a skill that you need to have. Your staff, encourage, educate, motivate, and yet hold them accountable. These are not easy to do. And getting back to this HR thing, you're living on a ranch, and sometimes the housing arrangements are clustered. Sometimes they're spread out. Believe me, spread out's better. And I was visiting with a large ranch manager I knew very well by the name of Bill Hopkins. He managed the Deseret Ranch down in Utah. This was years ago. We were discussing being a large ranch manager, and Bill said, being a large ranch manager is one of the best jobs you can have. But he said, being the mayor sucks, and it does. So your on-ranch staff, there's always stuff going on. Do you realize that if you have an employee that has a domestic problem in his household, that's on your doorstep? How do you handle that? Or there's friction between employees. If you've got more than 3 employees, I'll guarantee you there's going to be some friction somewhere part of the time. It's just human nature. The larger the crew, the more the friction can be. And managing that friction, it can be a challenge. And so those are just things that you can look forward to. it's all manageable, but it's part of what you're going to have to do. And last but not, certainly not least, when you graduate from here, you're beginning, you set the basis to continue to learn, and you will have to. You're going to have to learn, you're going to have to use others. And sometimes it's using others in your staff, sometimes it's using others outside your ranch or staff, experts, consultants, other people. I can tell you that everybody's got a skill set, things they kind of naturally do, things that you kind of learn that you can do better, things that you're just not good at. I'm not good at forwarding, onboarding new employees. Everybody know what onboarding is? Where you take a new employee and you kind of walk them through not just the operation, your processes, how things are done, why things are done, who they're interacting with, how the whole ranch culture works. I'm not good at it. I always had somebody that was, and that was their job. I'm not a great negotiator, whether it's on ranch or off ranch. Sometimes you're in a position where you're negotiating this or negotiating that. I'm a little too much to the point, cut to the chase, get to the end to be a good negotiator. But I always had somebody on my staff that actually had that back, and put them in that position. Let them use that skill. It's not demeaning to you. Your job as a manager is, again, have the right employee, right seat on the bus doing the right job, and figure out their skill set and use their strengths to your advantage. So that's part of that leadership and management. Maintaining that 30,000-foot view. We had what we called WATB sessions. Anybody ever heard of that? They teach it in the Ranching for Profit School, which is one of the outside schools I went to. I would encourage you to go to. At some point, they teach mainly family ranchers how to look at their ranch as a business, not as a lifestyle. And it's pretty involved. Again, I could talk for an hour on what they teach and how they approach it, but it's excellent training. But a WATB session stands for Working on the Business, WOTB. And that is twice a year, getting that 30,000-foot view. In essentially, it's a work session where you pull your staff, and sometimes it's even ownership, into a meeting. It's going to take at least half a day, and you work through this thing to get a 30,000-foot view of your property and say, what's going on in this property? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? You do a SWOT analysis, essentially, and what it will end up doing, it will drive an action plan. For the next 6 months, what do we need to get done? And there's going to be staff members assigned to some of those. And so that process would help you stand back and look at that 30,000-foot view twice a year. Extremely healthy, hard to do. Most operations, unless it becomes part of your culture, can't do that. It's very hard to do. In our systems, in our ranches, every ranch does a WATB for sure at least once a year, and sometimes twice. It just depends on the operation. And so setting up systems like that can help you be successful. So we talked about a bunch of stuff here. You guys didn't raise your hand, but I'd be glad to answer questions. I got a couple more slides talking about research, which we can get to in a minute. But any thoughts on what we've talked about? Anything I missed? Rachel, did you see anything? Yes.
The question you kind of talked around a little bit about it, but what are your philosophies on conflict management? Because on conflict management with employees, bosses, I guess, do you have any insights or special tools you use for managing conflict on a ranch level and then at the level you're at now?
That's a great question. And the larger the ranch, the more people that are involved, sooner or later, there's going to be conflict. It will need to be managed. When I got all the way up to Turner, we actually had a professional HR department that was in Atlanta, but when we had significant conflicts come up, they would help us with that. I learned so much from that. Again, it's ongoing education and training. Usually conflicts start with communication or lack thereof. Now, sometimes something just falls off the wagon. In other words, you jump from everything seemed fine, but all of a sudden I've got an insubordinate employee. The tricky issue is, you know, we don't live in a date and time anymore where you can just say, I've had enough of you, pack your stuff and leave. There's real legal limits and liabilities to that. So working through those issues is crucial. I can tell you that I have learned that once I start into an issue where I think I either have conflict or I'm going to have conflict, everything's in writing, expectations are laid out, and there's a going back and forth. Sometimes there's a mediation. In other words, you know, employee doesn't want to talk with me. Okay, talk to them. You don't want to tell me what it is. Trying to keep open, honest, and fair goes a long ways. But at the end of the day, everybody gets to choose. The leadership training we went through with Echelon Front, they wrote 2 books. One was called Extreme Ownership. The second book they called Dichotomy of Leadership. Extreme ownership, the theme basically is if your team failed, it's your failure because you didn't do what you needed to have them be successful. I could kind of understand that, and certainly leadership owning up to the fact that I'm accountable before everybody first is extremely important. However, there are times where you've got employees that are going to make decisions because they want to make decisions. Their second book, Dichotomy of Leadership, actually got into how do you hold employees accountable? How do you put on a track so that they're either successful or, all right, this isn't working, we tried, and now we're going to do something different. Because at the end of the day, everybody gets a decision. Sometimes employees are going through difficulties at home or in a family or health issues that affect their work performance and how they interact with their employees. You need to be understanding, you need to help them where you can. On the other hand, at the end of the day, the work has to get done. And so good, clear communication, everything in writing, reach out and involve others with expertise when you need to.
To follow up on that a little bit, Mark, I mean, you outlined the kind of formal education that you had with regards to animal and land management. And so beyond the School of Hard Knocks and experience, how did you further your knowledge and skills in managing employees and managing people?
That's a great question. I mean, really, it's learning from others as you're going along. For instance, I was a trained agricultural producer. I showed you regenerative farming and polyculture cropping. I bought more Roundup than anybody here, guarantee you. I mean, that's my history. And so you learn from others as you go along, other experts in your field. I didn't know a lot about conservation, endangered or threatened species. And yet, through the course of working with other people in the company, experts, if you will, I absorbed and learned a lot of that knowledge. Working with our HR department essentially helped me work through several difficult issues and gave me probably some skills to try to see these things coming and head them off if you can. And the issue can be sometimes size and scale. You've got a ranch with 4 employees, you got a significant, you don't have an HR department. Who do you go to? There are consultant experts that you can pull in for that. And sometimes you stay out of legal trouble and you need to talk to a labor attorney. I mean, all of this is, again, this ongoing education and training. And some of it's trial by fire. It was for me. But just knowing that that's there and creating a network with other branch managers, other people that are going to be exposed to the same issues and problems can be extremely helpful. in my career, have developed several large ranch managers. We're friends, we're compadres, we share information back and forth, but also it's a sounding board to go to, hey, I got this problem with an employee. This is what I think's going on. What do you think? And can be extremely helpful. Yes.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen, like while overseeing many ranches at a time? And what are some of the things that these challenges have taught you?
The main challenges concerning what? I'm hard to
Sorry,
say.
overseeing many ranches at a time.
Oh, mini rent. And the issue is time and space. You only have so much. I mean, I use the analogy on, I'm a handy guy on a small place. I can do it all. On 70,000 acres, I can't do just part of it. Well, you just blow that up to 15 or 16 ranches. And what it takes is a staff to oversee, give umbrella management. When I left Turner at the end of December, I had essentially four employees under me. We had regional managers, so they would give direct oversight to 4 or 5 ranches. So the manager on that ranch, their first call would be to that regional manager. Hey, I've got a disease problem going on, or I just had a fire, or, I've got an employee issue. So we build essentially a management network to kind of cover that. And so that's how we developed it there. My last 4 years at Turner involved training the staff under me to be successful when I stepped back. I've received 3 calls since I retired. That's perfect. That's how it should be. It's because they were exposed to everything. They were already responsible for most of what was going on. They didn't need me. Probably better off without me at this point. I'm probably better off without them too, but that's another story. And so multi-ranch management is it's multifaceted, and probably using your outside experts, using your people's pointed expertise. How do you get a timber carbon contract on 400,000 acres of timber? I drove that program, but I didn't do it. I ended up finding people that could get that done for us. And so that's what you do at that level.
So I'm gonna hate to cut this off, but all you students and really anybody else, if you want to continue discussion with Mark, you can go down to room 138. We've got lunch waiting for you, and you can go for the next couple hours. So thank you very much for coming. If you want to talk to him, help yourself, grab something to eat. We'll give you a little break, but all right, not too long. Thanks for coming, everybody.
How are you, Mark? Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Very well.
You were real close.
I was. I just left in May.
Hey, John.
Yeah, back here, finishing my PhD.
How are you? Good for you. Good for you. Are you going to teach or do research?
I don't know. I'm working through that.
That's all right.
Either research or management or consulting or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you'll have lots of opportunities. That'll be good.
Yes. Yeah, I've got to go. I have to be careful for right now, but I'm say.
Were you at Red Rock for a couple of years?
Yeah, I was there for 4 years.
4 years. Good experience.
Very good experience. Learned a lot.
And your PhD focus is?
Grazing management, livestock behavior, forage quality change management.
Yeah.